Constructing your life is about much more than just building a bank account. Each week, join real estate entrepreneur and mindset coach Austin Linney as he interviews guests who are constructing their dream lives and impacting the world around them on a daily basis. If you're an entrepreneur or wanting to start a business, or you just want to hear motivating stories of how others have overcome the odds, you are in the right place. And now for your host, Austin Linney.
Guys, welcome back to Construct Your Life. This is Austin Linney here. Guys, we're going to take the knowledge level up a touch. He's got the DR in front of his name. As you're not a dentist, are you though?
I'm not, no.
Okay, my dad was a dentist for 38 years, and all his friends used to say, that's not really a doctor. But we have, it's kind of like the Coast Guard guys. The Marines saying the Coast Guards aren't really Coast Guards. They're just beach bums, So we got Dr. Jamil in the house. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing so well, man. Thank you for having me and happy to be here with everyone who's tuning in.
So in true Austin Linney fashion, we got connected. I don't know much about you. You have a doctor in front of your name. So I figured you know somewhat's going on, but who are you? What do you do? Start your story where you want to, and we'll go from there.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll give kind of a short, medium version of that, and then we can dive in wherever. So in regards to kind of what I do, I'm a life coach, business coach, and relationship coach, and I'm also a licensed naturopathic doctor. I've been a coach now for 16 years. I've been doing it professionally for a little bit more than 3, but I've been in the field working with people for 16. And it's just my deepest passion, really getting to dive deep into conversation with people. They share with me their biggest goals, their dreams, but they also share the issues, the problems, the challenges, whether in their business or their mindset, their finances, their health, their relationships, like that full spectrum of the human experience. And we dive deep in conversation. I get to know their soul, like who they really are. And we find out, like, how do you see your world? How do you generate and create your perspective of these problems? And there's that Wayne Dyer quote, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And so if I can help somebody shift the way they see their life, the way they relate to their partner, whatever that is, the whole world changes for them. And it's like, I love the metaphor of the rising tide that lifts all boats. And so if you're the tide, metaphorically, each boat is an area of your life. And as the tide rises, every area improves. And so that's the work that I've been doing with people now for, as I said, for quite a while. And it's been nothing short of miraculous, both for them and for me to be a part of that. And so that's the short version of that.
No, I love that. And I think what's interesting, right, is I tell my clients is like, think of your life like a dirty windshield that's gone across the United States. There's bug shit on it. There's dirt. There's rain. And all I'm here to do is to wipe it off so you can kind of see through to realize that everything that you need and want is right in here. And I think internally, a lot of times when I find people, because you don't know much about me, but, I was homeless. I was a drug addict in my 20s, and I was an alcoholic for 20 years. I've been sober for 2 years and 8 months. And
Beautiful.
I think a lot of times we seek the answer from somebody else, which a coach and a therapist and all these things help. But really what they're helping do is they're helping you light the fire that you lost somewhere in the midst of the journey, right? I mean, and I know as a coach and as somebody that helps, when you see that fire turn on, man, there's no better feeling.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, part of from my perspective, it's like part of my job, and it sounds like yours as well, is to believe in you more than you believe in yourself.
Yep.
To help you bring out the magic, the miracle that is you, that you are to the world. Can I share a story with you that I think could really penetrate that point? And so this also gives people an idea of kind of where I'm coming from. But so when I was 19 years old, my dad had a brain aneurysm. And for anyone who's not familiar with what that is, imagine one of the blood vessels in the brain, think of it like a tube, and it starts to balloon out. And if you're fortunate, you have kind of the worst headache of your life, and you go and you get it taken care of, and hopefully you're okay. My dad wasn't as fortunate, and his ruptured. And he was in a 4-hour brain surgery. We were told chances of survival were less than 5%. And, those 4 hours felt like years. And then when at the end of it, he survived. And it was, already a miracle. And he was in a coma. And we were told by the neurosurgeon he might not ever wake up. And in that moment, I was 19, he was 49. And I had this immense sense of regret. I had this feeling that I took my relationship with my dad for granted, that I told myself that, oh, I have time. He's going to be around 30 years, 40 years, 50 years or more. Not thinking, this is the day, like today is the last shot. And there was this feeling that I didn't really know him to the degree that I could have, that I would have wanted to. I didn't have that kind of relationship with him. And now it felt like I wasn't going to have that opportunity because we're being told he's in this critical care period and he could die at any minute. Fast forward 3 years. He survived 3 years before he did pass away at 53. And in those 3 years, he was in a coma for several months. But when he came out of it, we helped him make almost a full recovery. I took several years off after college to be one of his primary caregivers. And I got to spend 10, 15 hours a day with him. And it was amazing in so many ways. And there was also hardship too. After that kind of aneurysm, he was prone to seizures all the time. He had short-term memory loss. There were times where he even forgot who I was after spending 4 days in a row with him, like over 10 hours each. You can imagine that would really get to you. And that experience, though, in those 3 years, it shifted so much in my life and it opened me up to so many perspectives that I had not had prior, or I might have had them intellectually, but it was like an embodied, felt understanding at that point. And just seeing the miracle that is every day, seeing the fact that every day 150,000 people don't wake up. And if you're listening to this, you weren't one of them. And if you've got people that you really care about in this world and they woke up too, it's like, wow, it doesn't get better than that. And yet so many of us wake up from this place of something out of the ordinary, extraordinary has to happen in order for me to feel happy, grateful, whatever word you want to use. Meanwhile, like the most miraculous thing, you're alive, which means everything that you want is possible because you're alive, occurred right from when you opened your eyes. And when my dad passed away, I remember being at his wake, and it was 5 hours and over 7,000 people came. And I shook every single person's hand. My dad was a primary care physician, and almost everyone said, your dad saved my life. And people from all walks of life, cultures, colors, creeds, religions, everything. And I sat there having this feeling. A, I was humbled to see the impact that he had. But B, there was a realization that I'd been playing small, that I cared way too much about other people thought about me, that I was afraid of rejection. And because of that, and this kind of brings it full circle why I'm bringing it up, I was wearing a mask. And my mask was, who do I need to be accepted, to be loved, to be enough, to be validated, to be all these things, right, that so many of us strive to be. The challenge is when you play that game, even when you win, you lose. Because when you play that game, if people love you for your mask, they're not loving you for you because they don't know you. They've never seen you. And so I recognized that. And there was this moment of realizing, in those 3 years, 2 of my cousins passed away, and one was 20 and one was 21. And one of them was completely out of nowhere, like hyper sudden. And the other one, it was a really, really, really rare, like bone cancer that took him quickly. And if you spoke to either one of these guys when they were like 18 or 19, and you said, tell me about what you want your life to be, I promise you neither guy would say I'd be dead in a couple of years. And so from that space, there's this Dalai Lama quote that I always think about when I share this story, where he says, most people live as if they're never going to die, and then they die having never really lived. And it's like, from that space, stop waiting, stop procrastinating, stop putting your life on hold because you're living from fear. And you justify it with whatever story you tell yourself to play small and to hold yourself back. And it's like, in that moment for me at that wake, it was like that light bulb, aha, never again moment of, I'm going to really live. I'm going to be me. I'm going to love fully. I'm going to live my life in such a way that every night when my head hits the pillow, if God, the universe, angel, whatever, tells me you're not waking up tomorrow, I can say in a peaceful space, okay, like, what a ride. Like, it was good. There might've been more that I wanted to do, but I lived my life up until this point as authentically and fully as I know how to. And so many people that I've met over these last 10 years have not put themselves in a position where they can say that. But because they're living in more of a non-intentional or unconscious way, kind of going through the motions, and they do the same kind of things every day, they don't recognize it until they have one of those wake-up calls, whether it be a loved one dies or they get a health diagnosis and scare or something happens, near-death experience. And very often that might be enough to kind of wake them up out of it. But you don't have to go through something like that. It's like, I forgot who said it. I think it's Woody Allen, but he said, you're never going to learn from the mistakes of others because you're never going to live long enough to make them all yourself. And it's like, for me, I make my mission to help leaders and high performers create an extraordinary life without regret. And it stems from that experience with my dad. Because when I think about an extraordinary life is a life on your terms, a life that, your head hits that pillow and you're not going to wake up tomorrow. You're at peace with it. There is no regret. You lived your life, not somebody else's version of your life. Mm-hmm. And that to me is what it's all about.
There's so much there, but what's interesting is you said a couple things there that felt different. I think one of the things that I wish people would do is you said feel many times there. And I think you also said intelligent. I think the people that know what they should do, like per se, but they haven't felt it. Right. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing I tell anybody that's in recovery. Like, that feeling when you feel fucking badass and you haven't had a drink in like 30 days, I want you to chase that motherfucker. And I want you to keep chasing it, because that feeling is rooted in something deeper than you. That feeling of, holy shit, my life is reborn and I had this opportunity. So I tell everybody all the time, my two favorite people to hire are people that are in recovery and people that are in the military, because they'll go to work because they know what the other is, and they're so excited to be. I think we can get so complacent in understanding that there's really so much relatively ease in our life, air conditioning and lights and internet and all these things. And like, ultimately, my life has blown up many a times, 6 or 7 different times, what people would consider catastrophe. But in that madness and in that chaos, I've picked up what I didn't want anymore. And I've actually moved on. And here's the scary thing. There's actually a lot of freedom in that, because then it doesn't own me anymore and I've let it go. So they're, what they deem as like, holy shit, is actually pretty great, right? Because I picked up what I wanted and left behind what I didn't. And so, but what I'm hoping, and I think you're doing the same thing, what I'm trying to get across and what I will spend the rest of my life seeking is, why do we have to have the family member die? Why do we have to get a DUI? Why do we have to do all these things in order for us to change? Why do we have to make it so uncomfortable on ourselves that we finally force to change? Why can't we see something ahead of time, or start down the path and maybe pivot and change? Why do we as a society have to get so uncomfortable in order to make the change?
Yeah. And to your point, I've often found in my own life and from people that I've spoken to over the years, and different, mentors and things of that nature, so often when you look back on your life and you pinpoint what are the moments, the memories that you have that you would identify as, those worst things that ever happened to you. And it's really easy to look back and say, I wish that never happened. At the same time, recognizing that everything that you've been through has helped you get to where you are right now, and that you would not be the person that you are today, knowing the lessons and the wisdom and things of that nature that you have without having gone through that. And that maybe there are some really beautiful things in your life right now, whether they be people, a career, a location that you live in, like something, people you've helped, that never would have happened if you didn't have that experience. And so I look at my own life, and, I'm 31 right now, and my dad passed when I was turning 22. So I was 21 when he passed, and aneurysm when he was 19. So we're 10 years or so since he passed away. And I look back at those 3 years and I see who I became. Now, I was coaching before my dad's aneurysm, but that experience, it brought my coaching practice to a depth that it never had been before, because I was able to hold a space for people that I wasn't able to prior to that. Sure. And over the last decade, I've had people message me and tell me, hey, I was a couple months ago, you were fairly heavily in my life. And I want you to know that if it wasn't for you, I was going to commit suicide. And I didn't, because of you. And I had no idea. And people who have told me, hey, that video you made, that saved my relationship, this thing over here, like this really helped. And I think about the impact, and I think none of this would have happened if I didn't go through that experience with my dad. Sure. And when I can be with that experience in that way, I can look back and I can say with full authenticity that those 3 years were simultaneously the worst thing that ever happened to me and the best thing that ever happened to me. Mm-hmm. Because it's only been 10 years. And same to what you said, I plan on doing this the rest of my life. And so all these people that I'm going to get to positively impact, all these potential lives that I can save, let's say, would not happen if it wasn't for that experience, that hardship. You mentioned earlier about thinking and feeling. And I find one of the biggest traps we fall into, I just, spoke at a real estate conference about a week or two ago. And I mentioned right in the beginning, I said, my request is don't fall into the trap of thinking, I know that already. Because there are some things I'm going to share with you today that you've heard before. Mm-hmm. And there's some things that you haven't. And that's cool. But just because you've heard it before doesn't mean you live it. Just because you know it doesn't mean you embody it. There's a lot of things that I know that I don't do. And if it really was that good for me and I'm still not doing it, I must not know it as well as I think I do. And so it's that same kind of thing. It's like so many of us, we have that intellectual understanding because we're all kind of drowning in information. Yeah. You can get information anywhere right now. And it's so easy to kind of be a collector of information. And you're gathering, thinking like checking the box mentally. I know it. Yeah. But so maybe you've studied all the stuff about finances. You've studied all the stuff about relationships in terms of like intellectually, but you have no money or your relationships bust. It's like, if you're having all these issues, you don't know it. Like you just intellectually understand it. Yeah. And so when people can be open to that, and as you said, shift it into a felt experience, like be with it. What are you suppressing? What are you running away from? What are you hiding? And when you can be honest with yourself and really call it as it is, then you can move through it. And when you move through it, you heal. There's that little beautiful phrase, feel it to heal it. If you don't feel it, it is not going to heal. And there's one of the things I do with people is I help them release emotional stuck energy and trauma from their past, different things that I'm, combining hypnotherapy in different areas that I've got some training in. And it is incredible to see people that are anywhere from, I've done it people in their 20s, I've done it people in their 60s and everywhere in between. And you look at people decades away from when they were a kid, and yet this financial problem, this relationship problem, this confidence problem, this whatever stems from them being 4 years old and something happened and they made it mean something and it completely wrecked their whole life. Mm-hmm. And they've never thought about it. Or they had some trauma and it was so painful that the subconscious mind, the ego, like puts up the walls to protect itself, which is fair. And unless it's addressed, you're not going to get past this. Mm-hmm. And so I just find it so fascinating that we kind of been conditioned, especially, in this conversation, two guys, it's like, as men, there's this perspective, don't show emotion, don't cry, tears are weakness, like all these things that some guys grow up hearing. I'm not sure the percentage, but probably a large amount. And from that place, that is so dangerous. Like from the medical background that I have, the amount of people that I've worked with, because right now I don't practice medicine anymore. I do full coaching, but I do combine the health with it. But when I did practice, there was this perspective of seeing so many people who have dis-ease in their body, these conditions, that they're seeing all these other doctors and nobody can help them. And then I start talking to them and we go a little bit, from the surface, completely out in left field. They're like, why are you asking me these questions? And then we're diving in. And then they find out, oh, there was this one example of this woman. She's had pain for 13 years on the whole right side of her body, nerve pain, following a car accident where she damaged her cervical spine in the neck. And she's gotten epidural injections for pain. She's gotten pain prescription drugs. Nothing works. And so she gets sent to where I'm at, and I have this conversation with her. Now, on the fourth conversation, I finally figure out what's going on. And I find out that, this woman has this giant fear that her family is going to find out how debilitating her condition is, which means that her daughters, let's say, are going to then derail their life to take care of her. And she doesn't want to be responsible for that. Mm-hmm. And so I thought about that and I thought, why is it that somebody would really have that fear as strongly as she does unless they've experienced it themselves? And so I asked her about it. And it turns out that exact thing happened when when she was younger, her mom got sick. That happened to her. And then fast forward even deeper, and there's this deep-rooted fear from when she was a kid. It had nothing to do on the surface with that car accident that happened like 13 years ago. Mm-hmm. She's in her 60s. Helped her release that. All of her pain went away and it never came back. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, on the surface, nobody would talk about that. Nobody would look at that. I've done that same thing. People had autoimmune conditions and they went away. That doesn't mean it's always going to happen. But the fact that it does tells me that there's a relation there. Body, mind, emotion, spirit, it's all like one thing. And so from that interconnectedness, it's like in the holistic medicine kind of perspective, if you have like hepatitis, you're not just a walking liver. That's not what I'm treating. Like you're a human being, you're a person. And the emotional side, what you've been through, your story up until this point, that plays a part in your how you show up, in this situation right now in your life. And so coaching is the same way. And so when we can really dive in with somebody and explore, what have you been through? What has brought you to this point? And maybe, the amount of times I hear, I've never told anybody that before. It happens all the time because people don't really feel safe to share, or they don't think people actually care enough to know. You kind of get, we at least in New York, but like we're brought into this like society where somebody says, "Hey, how's it going?" And you're kind of expected to just say fine. They're just asking out of formality. But when I ask somebody that, I really want to know. And so I don't mind getting sucked into the 1 hour explanation of, how you're doing. Because if I can actually help you, then beautiful, let's make it happen. But I can go down on that tangent forever. But everything's that's my point.
Well, I mean, half the time they hire me, they think they hired me for this reason, and we wound up, 100 miles in the wrong direction. But I'm setting them up so they don't pay attention to what's happening until it's time to slam the door shut over here, right? And so it's like what you're doing is like this is Kyle Cease is like my favorite dude, ex-comedian that's a personal development guy. And he said, if you're writing your goals down, then your goals are being written by the view of your past self. So how could they be amazing? How could they be ridiculous, right? So here's your view of yourself, and you're trying to take the lid off that to go 30 feet up above. And ultimately at the end of the day, you're trying to shake something loose, right? Because there was something in your childhood, whatever you want to call it. There was something that you love that you really got a kick out of. And I find that as adults, one of the biggest thing I find in adults is that we just don't have fun anymore.
Yeah.
Like we don't have fun. We don't smile. It's like, well, I'm doing my miracle morning and I'm writing down my goals. And me and my coach joke about this all the time. We bastardized now miracle morning. We turned it into this fucking robot thing, and it's like.
If I can make a quick interjection right there.
Sure.
I love the way you just said that, because think about it like this for everyone listening. It's like the way you moved your arms, like I'm doing my miracle morning, as if it's just something to check off the box. But it's like, but did your morning feel like a miracle?
Mm.
Or were you just doing your routine because that's just what you're supposed to do for performance? Like, you're just thinking, like I work with a lot of people that try to perform at high levels, and that's beautiful. But it's like, don't forget why you're doing it. Like, don't forget the fulfillment side of it. Don't forget the happiness side of it. Like, can you just go for a walk and be in bliss? Can you just look at a bird and just start tearing up when the bird's singing because you're so freaking present to the moment? Or do you not even hear the bird singing because you're thinking about something that's going to happen 3 weeks from now that you're worried about? And like, that's what's happening. I find so often, like you said, people aren't having fun. People aren't feeling connected. People aren't feeling alive. They're just going through the motions.
And I think ultimately what I see, and I'm guilty of it as well too, because I'm a visionary when it comes to my businesses, is I think that we can be caught up too far in our future vision to be not living who we are present today. I think at the end of the day, people ask me all the time, how do you coach? How do you have 2 podcasts? How do you have multiple businesses? I said, well, I'm kind of just compartmentalized and I handle what's in front of me, and what we're talking about right now matters. And then an hour from now, whatever I'm talking about then matters. But that's not what people are doing. They're saying, well, I know, but if I react this way, then this is going to be this thing over here on Thursday. And it's like, okay, like, hold on, like just show up for today. Ask yourself, how can I be better than yesterday? And then move, and then keep moving forward. It's like, it's really interesting. I'd be curious to ask your opinion. So I have women, I have people in Canada, I have people in health insurance, I have people in real estate, I have people all over, 23, 50 years old. And I find that a single core item runs down the center of all of them. It doesn't matter what position they're in. Do you find the same thing to be in your clients as well too?
I do find, and I want to answer that, and I want to speak to something you just said before, but I'll answer it first. I find that at the core, especially when I do the emotional release work, because it doesn't just release emotions such as, let's say, anger, sadness, fear, hurt, guilt, abandonment, shame, that kind of stuff. But there's also beliefs that it can release. And the most common beliefs that I found that are at the core of what people are dealing with is some combination of I'm not lovable, I'm not enough, kind of the deep-rooted things.
You notice I didn't give you the answer what mine was because I wanted to see what you said, and my answer was going to be they don't love themselves.
Yeah, and something that I wanted to speak to, assuming my memory doesn't just completely disappear in that moment. Let me just give me a second. Let me see if it's there. It will come back.
Yeah, it's the core of everything, right? You can have goals, you can have dreams, you can have all these things, but if you don't love yourself, then what are we doing here?
It came back.
Okay, what you got?
The thing being, I want to preface what I said before, but can you just go for the walk, let's say, and like be, at bliss? Some people hear that, and especially if they identify as like a high performer, in my experience, and they hear me in a way I don't intend it to be said, but it's also because it's almost incomplete what I said. I'm all for planning for the future, but I make a distinction between the macro vision and the micro process. And from that space, go into the future, get crystal clear. Now it's going to change, obviously, as you move into it, but get as clear as you can. What do you want? Like, go in the right direction for you. What are you building? What are you going after? What do you want the end to look like? But then come back to this moment and live today fully. Like, come back to this moment and be here now. It's like somebody asked me in some podcasts I did over the last couple of years, something so simple, but it was like, if you could give somebody a piece of advice, what would it be? And on the day, in that moment, it was just be here now. 3 words. They could change everything for you. That we're trying to be everywhere but here. We're trying to do everything but feel what we're feeling right now. Like we're trying to avoid, trying to distract, or trying to get away from it. But being in it, being with it is how you go through it.
Well, you know what I tell everybody, because I train a lot of people that want to be coaches, right? And I said, this is the most backward statement I've ever made, but a lot of coaches get what I'm about to say. The hardest thing about being a coach is for you to be what they need you to be instead of you being what you think they need you to be. Meaning, I don't need to be any superhero. I just need to hold space for somebody to be able to have a conversation where they're heard. Like, I don't think people are heard anymore, like with no judgment, right? Like, I done some crazy ass shit in my drug years. So I can beat everybody's story so they feel really comfortable having that moment with me. And the number one thing they walk away is, you heard what I was saying and you had no judgment. And so it's like, guys, slow down, be present for somebody, ask them the right questions. And then you might find out some things about yourself too, because ultimately when I'm fixing somebody else, or we're having this conversation here, or I'm having a podcast, I'm also thinking about my own things that I have going on too. So listen to these conversations and open up and say, oh, that might work. And it's that push and pull and being heard and listening, right? I think we need to listen a little bit more.
Yeah, and if I can just add, for everyone listening, one really, really powerful perspective that I invite you to take on. People are not their behavior, and people are not the labels that you put on them. And so something to notice, and we've all done this, myself included, all the time. Let's say there you are walking down the street and you see somebody who in this particular period in time happens to be between residences, right? What somebody might call homeless. Yeah. And we then label them as the homeless person. And we carry certain judgments about that. They're dirty, or they're this, they're that. I don't want to be next to that person, or whatever we tell ourselves. What you're not seeing is that's a human being just like you. And you have no idea what their situation is. And so, maybe someone did a lot of drugs, or maybe somebody had addictions to this, or maybe somebody really messed up in this area of their life. But no matter what somebody does, it's not who they are. And that's why there's like a psychological forgiveness. There's this idea that people do what they know how to do in the moment, given the thinking they have that looks real to them. And so if in this moment, notice, what do people say in hindsight when they think they messed up? What was I thinking? Now, why do they say that? Because whatever they were thinking at the time seemed like a good idea. Whatever they were thinking at the time, to the best of what they knew in that moment, was the right move.
Yeah.
In hindsight, when they have more clarity and they have a bigger scope of the vision, they might look back and go, oh, wow, I was way off. But again, very, very, very few people, maybe you can argue like a psychopath or a serial killer that's got something going on up there, but the vast majority of people.
You know what I tell them? Well, I'm really upset by this. Well, thank goodness. That means you're not a psychopath. Like, hello,
Exactly. And so, but as it relates to us, there's self-forgiveness there. But as it relates to everybody else, everyone is listening right now, very likely you have some judgments about people in your life, whether they be close to you or not, who have done some things that maybe you aren't forgiving them for, or maybe you just carry around some resentment or whatever the case may be. This way of looking at them strips them of the label being, oh, they have this political affiliation, or they're this skin color, or they're this amount of socioeconomic status, or they're this type of person, whatever that is. You strip all the labels away, and what you're left with is the person, the spirit, the soul, the consciousness, whatever you want to call it. That's what's left. And from that space, that's exactly what you are. And so can you relate to this person just as a human being? Can you actually have love and understanding and compassion for somebody who you know nothing about, but what you do know is there a fellow brother or sister on this journey of life who has gone through a lot of stuff, especially if they keep in mind, like there's that old expression, hurt people hurt people. You don't have people walking around filled with love, compassion, bliss, and peace that are killing people, that are hurting people, that are abusing people. That doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. So anyone who's doing that, and I'm not condoning, of course, the act. I'm just saying from the perspective of where they're coming from, the intention. You look at that and you go, oh, wow, there's a level of understanding that develops in you. Judgment drops and understanding increases. And from that space, compassion arises in you. And you go, wow, if I saw life the way they did, if I had the same upbringing they did, if I learned all the same stuff they did, I probably would have done the same thing. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, we're not that different. It's just that my path up until this point didn't bring me to that space and yours did. Or my path introduced certain people or lessons that have made it where when that did show up, I didn't choose it. But if you didn't have that same lesson, can't really expect you to have the same choice that I would make. And so I just think there's so much freedom there, just dropping that judgment, being fully present, engaging in life, and actually being loving as a verb, as a process. Making the choice. How can I be more loving today? Not only with myself, but with everyone around me. You meet someone in the grocery store, and maybe they're the person ringing up your food. You have no idea what happened to them that day, and they're giving you some attitude. Is it because they're a bad person? No, but that's the label we throw on them, and we just see them through that filter. But what can you do to make that person's day a little bit easier? How could you put a smile on their face? How could you make it not as bad for them? Like something of that nature. And when we can come from that space, I just find our experience of life is not only so much more enjoyable for ourselves, but you become a walking blessing for everyone around you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have a coaching client who is an ER nurse for 10 years and in San Francisco. And he said that before we started coaching together, he wasn't rude, but he was curt with all these druggies that used to come into the emergency room, like how, you're taking resources, like all this shit, right? Well, then he meets me, who's recovering meth addict and alcoholic, and I'm healthy now. I've lost 70 pounds. I'm what all this shit, right? And he said that in that moment, he has changed the way he handles them 100%. And he looks them dead in the face and go, I've seen the other side of this and it's possible. And he says that to them. And when he told me that, I started crying because I realized that by just me living my best version of my life, I'm a symbol that it can be better. Right. And I think you're 100% correct. And I use the same analogy. Like one of the things that blew me away, like I think this happens a lot with parents and kids, is that we don't realize that as kids, our parents are growing up and learning just like we are. And we have them up on this pedestal. And it's like, dude, they're just doing the best they can with what they got. And yeah, they might have made some mistakes, but like once you get there in your mind and you kind of change the dynamic of the relationship, you kind of realize, okay, well, why does my mom act that way? Well, how did her mom act? And you kind of like, oh, the patterns become more real. And I think that we have to step back and we have to really take some time to kind of, just like you said, you have to observe more and get the meaning behind the meaning. And there's really, they are not their behaviors. I love that.
I want to acknowledge you, something that you shared that relates to what I said earlier about sometimes the worst thing that ever happened to us creates the possibility of the best thing. And here's this experience that you went through. You came out the other side. You're doing what you do. You're shining your light. This doctor becomes a client of yours. They now have a patient. That patient gets told, I've seen the other side. Like, this is possible for you. That might be the kind of person who needed to hear that because they didn't think it was possible for them. Mm-hmm. And because of that, they got through it. Mm-hmm. And all because you went through it.
Yep. Yeah. And for me, and like, so I just got divorced last year. I got laid off from private equity. So I'm, whatever, shit keeps coming. But what I realize in every moment now, and maybe I'm a little too much a coach on this level, but the moment that we decided to get divorced, the first thought in my mind was, man, I'm really going to be able to help people with this because now I've realized that it's my lot in life to go through these things with reckless abandonment and energy and focus, and then turn around and say, now who can I help? And when I help that person, they help that person, and so on, and becomes this what I call ripple effect of impact, which knows bounds. My coach tells a story. He's the first guy I ever interviewed. He was addicted to coke like you've never met. Like, he could not get off of it, and he asked. So his daughter was going to be born. The next day, he asked God to kill him. He said, "Look, I can't fucking quit. Like, just fucking end it, right?" And he said, it was the day before she was born. And he said, in that moment, he doesn't even know how it got there, but he found a number of this guy in his pocket that he met like 5 months ago. And so he calls the number. And when he picks up the phone, the guy says this, "I've been waiting for your phone call." And he's like, "What?" And he said, "Down the street in an hour, there's a meeting. Go to it." And so he went to a 12-step program, and his daughter was born the next day. And he's coached people in the recovery space for 14 years. And I said this to him: your daughter being born has saved millions of lives. And he was like, "What?" And he like started crying because he didn't realize that one person's life, he's helped thousands, they've helped thousands, and so on and so on. So that moment for him, that daughter being born, that saving himself for her and being the father that he needed to be, her birth is actually more powerful than, he affected that person who then had a kid. He was, like, so just these ripple effects of impact are so important.
Yeah. When you shared that, I got tears in my eyes, and it was beautiful. And it just, for anyone listening, it brings up in me, the ego, it's almost like it has blinders, like that a horse might have, or like a tunnel vision. And the ego just sees what's right in front of it. And the ego says, this isn't what's supposed to happen based on whatever its expectations are. And the ego is looking, going, I don't like it. Like, this is bad. But then it's almost like your spirit or life, or whatever you want to call it, has the full 30,000 foot view of everything. And life is saying, just wait. And life is saying, you'll see. And it's like, from that perspective, we go through the hardship, and in the moment we can't see it. We can't see how could this possibly be a quote unquote good thing. And it's not that it's a good thing. I don't look at it as good or bad, but from the perspective that it's a stepping stone on your journey. It's whatever is that next step for you. And maybe there's a thing or a person or a situation that doesn't belong in your life anymore because it's not in the highest service of you or them. And you might be clinging to it out of familiarity. You're clinging to it because this is the way it's always been. And you're comfortable with it. And you don't want to rock the boat. But that doesn't serve the evolution of your soul. That doesn't serve your growth. And then if you couple that with the other person, assuming it's a person or it's a job or whatever it is, person saying, oh, I'm in this job. It's soul sucking. I feel like I'm dying inside, but they don't quit because they've got a dream on their heart, but they're afraid. And then they get fired. And on the one hand, it's like they're upset and they're pissed off because like the money situation is not where they want it to be. And it's really difficult. And that's true. Granted. And fast forward 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. And if they did pursue what was on their heart, getting fired was the best thing that could happen And so it's like, it's all relative, that good and bad in this moment. There's a story I learned from Alan Watts. He was a philosopher from like 100 years, like 60 years ago, 70 years ago, like the 50s, amazing guy. And he says, story of the Chinese farmer. And he basically says, for anyone who hasn't heard it, there's a Chinese farmer and this guy has a son and a horse. And the horse is in like a little pen. And one day the son by accident leaves the gate open and the horse runs away. That was like all they had pretty much. So the neighbors come by and they go, oh my God, that's so horrible and unfortunate. And the farmer says, maybe. And then the next day the horse comes back, but the horse comes back with a whole fleet of wild horses. And then they all go into the pen and the son closes the gate. Now they have like 20 horses. And so all the neighbors come by, wow, that's so fortunate. That's amazing. And the farmer says, maybe. And then the next day the son is out there trying to tame one of the horses and he gets his leg broken. And the neighbors come by, that's so unfortunate about your son. And he says, maybe. The next day, the army comes and they take all the sons in the village to go serve in the army. They don't take his son because his leg is broken. And then all the neighbors who their son was taken, they say, oh my God, you're so fortunate. And he says, maybe. And the whole point of the story is we never know enough in the moment to say if something is truly good or bad, because we don't know what the long-term ramifications are or the consequences of that thing. Something might be horrendously bad now. And granted, your experience is legitimate. Your emotion, your pain, your suffering, it's all real. I'm not invalidating any of it. It's completely real. But when you don't know, it's like saying, you're like, if you have if you're a parent and you've got a child and your child's like 5 and they really want to like stick the fork in the electrical socket and you stop them from doing it and they want it so bad and they think you're hurting them and like it's not fair and daddy's mean or mommy's mean because they're not letting me do this. And from a certain perspective, you're inflicting, from their perspective, pain on them. But it's so they don't die. It's like for their own good, but they don't see it because they're not thinking that way. And then they get older and then they go, oh, wow, like, why would I have done that? Thank God, like they didn't let me do that. I remember also hearing Alan Watts say, when I was younger, I had this reverence for grandfathers, older, wise, the long beard. He's like talking about him and depicting it. And he goes, I am a grandfather now. And he goes, and I recognize that I am just as stupid as I was back then. And like the same thing as you said, like our parents are just kind of figuring it out also. Now, yes, they're further in the journey. They may or may not have it. They don't have it all figured out. Nobody does. They probably have it more figured out than you do to some respects. If they've got decades on you, they probably made some things that they would call mistakes that you can learn from. But at the end of the day, it's like, we're all going through the journey. We're all figuring it out. And our ego likes to just put labels on things to better understand it and better understand people. But just like people aren't their behavior and you judge this person and you're judging them prematurely because you don't know, you're judging the situation based on like one point of data instead of the whole stream. Mm-hmm. And, I looked at my own life, and this is a fun little exercise people might want to try, but I looked at my life as it is right now. And in many respects, let me just plug this computer in. In many respects, my life right now is a dream compared to what it was a couple of years ago.
Yep.
All these things that I've been working towards that have come to pass, I've been really grateful for, and I've seen the work that I put into it. But this came to me like 6 months ago, a year ago, whatever it was. And I thought, so this is my situation right now. How did this come to be? And I said, well, this came to be because let's say I was in Arizona. That's where I went to medical school. And well, why was I in Arizona? Well, I was in Arizona because that situation with my dad happened. And then I go, and then, well, what about that? And I went all the way back from 31. At the time I was 30 when I did this, from 30 to 14. And I stopped and I said, and the reason why that happened was I didn't make the baseball team. And so baseball was like my life. Mm-hmm. And looking back now, it's like not making the baseball team was the best thing that ever happened to me. Mm-hmm. Because the cascade of events that led to, the relationships that I developed because of that, led me to where I'm at right now. Mm-hmm. Now, let's say I ended up being on the track team for 4 years, and that was amazing. But if I was on the baseball team, I'd have a different group of friends, different experiences, and it would not be the same life that I'm living right now. And so I look back and I go, wow, here's this thing. I remember walking up, this is 2004, I think, 2004. I walk up to the like the gym, and there's the piece of paper on the wall who made the team and who didn't, right? And I don't have to do that anymore, but I didn't make the cut, and I'm looking at it and I'm just devastated. I'm just like so like upset and like emotional about it. I was like, I thought I crushed that tryout too. It was horrible. And I didn't make the team. And it took a couple of days to like really like, be okay with it. But I look back now and I go, wow, that led me to where I'm at now. Wow, that situation with my dad led me to where I'm at now. Different relationship kind of stuff. Like all this stuff, it supports us in the grand scheme of things. Maybe there's a lesson for you to learn. Maybe the lesson's for somebody else, and you get to be the person who goes through it on their behalf. Who knows what it is? I can't tell you for sure, but I can just say that from experience, it all seems to kind of weave together in a way that will serve you if you're open to it, and it'll strengthen you. So you kind of go through like the crucible, you go through like the trial by fire, and you're going through it and you're becoming sharper, wiser, stronger, more competent, more capable. And from that perspective, what if everything you're going through is preparing you for what you said you wanted, but you just weren't capable because you weren't that version of you yet to be able to handle that? So in order for you to get stronger, it's like me being 11 or 10 or 9 and saying, I want to be Mr. Olympia. Well, you're probably going to have to go through puberty. It's going to be a requirement if you want to do that. And puberty might have its moments of being really shitty, but it's a necessary evil to get you to where you want to be. And so that's the same kind of thing with life.
I love it. If people want to find out about what you're doing, they want to find out your story, follow you, how would they do that?
I appreciate that, man. Yeah, it's crazy how time flies. We're already at the top of the hour. So if anyone has, resonated with this and you'd like to have a conversation, there's a lot of ways you can find me. If you go to my website, which is jamilsayegh.com, I can also give Austin all the links and maybe you can put it in the show notes. But on there, you can get a copy of a book that I wrote. It's called 20 Steps to Your Next Breakthrough. And I designed that really intentionally to be hyper practical with no excuse not to read it. So it's not some 400-page book that it can be the best book in the world, but you're never going to touch it. It's 70 pages. Every chapter is like a page or two, and you can get through it real quick, but it'll get you from stuck to momentum if you feel that's where you're at. And that can be really useful. There's also an audiobook version as well for a couple bucks, but you can get both of them on the website. You can also book a conversation with me if you feel like that would be useful. If you'd like to just speak about what's on your mind, what's on your heart, a goal, a dream that you have, a challenge you're going through, if I can support you in that and it feels like a good fit for both of us, we'll make some magic happen. And if it doesn't, for whatever the reason, then we part as friends and we had a great conversation. And if anyone's listening and they're resonating with my style, but maybe you're not ready for a conversation, if you go on Instagram, like Dr. Jamil Sayegh, DR, and then my name, or Facebook is just my name, Jamil Sayegh. I've got about 500, I think, videos and different pieces of content and all this stuff that people have told me over the years has been really valuable for them, and it might be really valuable for you as well. And so that's what I'd like to share with you.
I love it. Thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, guys. If you send us out to a friend that would get some value from this, share it with anybody in your network, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Construct Your Life with Austin Linney. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate, review, subscribe, and pay it forward by sharing with a friend. Most importantly, take this opportunity to start constructing your life by taking immediate action on what you learned. For show notes, resources, and more information on one-on-one coaching with Austin, visit constructyourlifepodcast.com.